episode of Legal Unicorns. I'm here at the Vodcast TV studio in Johannesburg in the Rosebank Mall. Big shout out to Marco and his team for putting us up again. It's a fantastic facility, so if you're in Joburg and you want to record a podcast, please use Vodcast TV. As I always say, our sponsors are Umbi and Stintit.com, and you'll find their links and details below. So please check them out as well. Today, I'm delighted to be back in Joburg, and I'm delighted to be joined by Lynn Roux, who's someone that I've known, and from a business perspective, for a couple of years, but we've never met, so we've met now, which is great. But a real high-class professional, someone that I have really enjoyed interacting with, and has a fantastic story and is a real human resources expert. You know, has been in that space for almost as well, in fact, longer than I've been in the legal recruitment space. And it's going to be a really interesting journey into her, how she's got here. And we're going to talk about HR and all its challenges with relation to the legal space as well. But it's a subject that we're both passionate about. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Rob, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to engage on something that I feel really passionate about.
Excellent. We're going to have a good chat, and we're going to get used to the microphones being in our face as well.
That's right.
So brilliant. Look, I mean, I've come up here from Cape Town, but you are a Joburg resident. I always, as I say, the purpose of the Legal Unicorns podcast is really to find out more about you as a person and your journey and into that profession. And then we'll talk about certainly the HR and its challenges, because I think personally it's facing some big changes at the moment, especially in the legal space. So please tell us about yourself. Where were you born? Where have you come from to get here?
It's a fairly simple story. I was born and raised in Johannesburg. I went to school in Johannesburg. I didn't venture too far when I went to university. I went to what was known as RAU, which and now called University of Johannesburg.
Okay.
My upbringing was middle class. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was an artisan. We are quite a close family. We lived walking distance from both my grandparents. So from a family perspective, we were fairly close and saw each other often enough.
And is that the south of Joburg or the north? Or
I grew up in what is known as Central Johannesburg in Mayfair West.
Okay.
Mayfair West, Mayfair, those are some of the areas that were the first to become mixed area residential, even before the Group Areas Act was officially scrapped in the early 90s. So that was where I grew up. I always think back fondly on the month-end visits into the centre of Joburg to go and pay our accounts. You go to the city hall to pay water and lights, and you go to the Risick Street post office to pay your telephone account. And then there was a big Edgar's on Market Street where you would go and pay the Edgar's account. And if you were lucky, they had a lovely restaurant on the top floor, and they served the most fantastic pie and chips with gravy. Yes, absolutely amazing.
You're speaking to an Englishman, so pie and chips is obviously one of our favourites.
Yeah. So I went to school, which was known as Western High School. That was my secondary school. In my matric year, the school in fact closed because a lot of the families had moved out of the area. And the year after, I'm not going to tell you which year that was because I'll give away my age. It actually opened as a mixed race school.
Okay, would have been one of the first, I guess.
Actually, no. Let me correct that. It was a school for what was known as non-whites at the time. And shortly thereafter, we had Nelson Mandela being released, and there was the election, or the now I can't remember the word now.
That's all right.
Not important.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela was released, and the group, all the restrictive apartheid laws were scrapped. And then it became a genuine mixed race school, and that area also then became mixed race.
A real changing time, not just for the country, but the big major city, Joburg, and you're in the middle of it. Really, I mean, what a wonderful, exciting time for change and for not just at the schooling, but at every level.
Yes,
fantastic to be part of that.
No, it was wonderful to see happen. It was unfortunate that the education department at the time didn't see their way clear, and I suppose they couldn't because it would have been illegal to open the school to mixed race children. But shortly after that, things changed for the better, and we are now where we are.
Yeah, 30-year journey.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we still have power, which is great.
Yes, long may it last.
So we're talking mid-90s there, and then you went to university, you said RAU, but
yes,
which is
UJ.
now UJ, yeah? One of the best universities in the country. And I won't give away my age, but you went to university at the same time as I did, so I now know. But education's obviously formed a big part of your your journey to date, and the list of, I'm looking at it now, the list of qualifications you have is incredibly impressive, which is fantastic. But from a work perspective, and we will come back to that. I'm not going over that because some of your qualifications are excellent. You started work sort of late 90s, right?
Early 90s. So immediately after I matriculated, I started working at one of the big banks. I was employed.
Oh, is that a Standard Bank?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I was employed as a casual teller. So in the week and on the weekends, and when I didn't have class, then I would go and work. And I did that for the duration of my studies. And once I'd completed my undergrad, I then did honours, but I did it part-time. And then I started working for them permanently. And during that time, then I was able to secure a transfer into the employee relations department.
Where your human resources journey began.
That's it. That's where my practical experience in human resources started. So, yeah.
So that, yeah, I mean, and I'm looking at I'm looking at some of your details here and your LinkedIn profile as well. Sort of the industrial relations is listed sort of between 97 and 2000.
That's correct, yes.
Before moving into the talent and transformation space at Deloitte's, right?
That's correct.
Another great brand.
Yes.
And going through, you were there for 15 years. From a youngster to a more mature professional, I mean, 15 years is a long time. Tell us about that journey. I mean, you must have got access to all manner of HR projects, the first transformation projects, the big corporates trying to put things in place to the first, before anyone had heard of DE&I. And so please tell us how you found that and how that journey was.
Okay, so at Standard Bank in the employee relations department, I focused purely on employee relations, industrial relations, and that's where I cut my teeth on IR. I think my career trajectory was unconventional in the sense that I've never been a generalist. I've never been employed in an environment as a generalist. So I started out as an employee relations specialist. I moved across to Deloitte with a portfolio of looking after their policies and procedures and also their employee relations. And then that grew into system involvement. They were implementing PeopleSoft at the time. And my first exposure was the implementation of the leave module, which was an interesting journey. I remember thinking to myself, how on earth am I going to marry the system stuff to what happens on the ground? But I was able to do that. And I grew my knowledge and expertise both in HR systems and more generalist HR management. I set up a shared service center for the HR administration after we'd implemented SAP. And then I also I was also involved in creating centers of expertise for HR systems, remuneration and reward, HR projects, and then employee relations.
Some of the listeners might not really appreciate, so maybe some of the younger listeners that we have in the HR and recruitment and legal space, is that this is pioneering stuff. This is the early to mid 2000s where, I mean, I said on a podcast the other day, but we were barely even using email at the beginning of the 2000s. What do we need that for? We just pick up the phone, So the stuff that you're involved with is a lot of it you might have having to suck your thumb a little bit in the sense of like, it's not been done before. So that must have been an exciting time as well.
It was a very exciting time. And because of the positioning of my portfolio, I was also involved in learning and development, and then also some DEI stuff, and a little bit of recruitment as well. So I got my generalist experience indirectly through my growth in Deloitte. I stuck around for 15 years, which to many would sound like a really long time to work for one employer, but I stuck around because they kept me interested. They kept giving me projects that were interesting, that enabled me to learn new things and to grow.
That's what a lot of people miss out on these days, is the thought process that as long as people are challenged, they'll stay. We have a lot of professionals that we work with who on paper it would appear that they move around a little bit too often, but a lot of the times it's because they're not being challenged. And you probably wouldn't have stayed somewhere for 15 years had it not been constantly moving and constantly challenging you, and in a way trusting you as well, I guess. That you were competent and capable, and obviously someone who's willing to try new things as new systems are coming in place and making it work.
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite important when you're offered an opportunity to do something that you're not really sure you can do, to actually grab it with both hands and learn how to do it while you're doing it. I think apart from being kept interested in having exciting challenges come my way while I was at Deloitte, I also worked with people and for people who were very good at development, coaching and mentoring. And also the work environment was a good one. The HR team was well established. The HR team was cohesive. There were good relationships. And yes, you do get stakeholders who are sometimes not the kindest, but within the HR space, there was always that psychological safety that someone's got your back. And you could always ask a question. And if you made a mistake, it was a learning opportunity rather than it being seen as a fatal flaw as such.
That's a really good point, and actually one we should, we shouldn't just brush over, because it's something that I say to the people that work with me a lot. I don't say it a lot, not every day, but don't be afraid to make a mistake. Be afraid to do nothing. You've got to try something, but it's not going to be fatal. And always ask questions. Never be afraid to put your hand up. My first job in recruitment in London, I gained the nickname Keen Rob, because I was always asking questions. Yes. How do you do that? What happens if I do that? And that's how you get it ahead. And people are willing to help, but it's good that you had that. It's important that you had that environment. And I think it's an environment, it's often looked over by some employers that they need to create an atmosphere where people can feel comfortable to make a mistake and ask a question. Sounds simple enough, but there's lots of places out there that don't have that environment.
There's a lot of dynamics that take place within a relationship between an employee and their manager, as well as within the team, for example. So good leaders will create the environment which is conducive to asking questions, making mistakes in a safe manner, and having your team's back. Having the team's back doesn't mean that you condone when something goes wrong. It means that we've made a mistake, so you have joint accountability, and we will fix it.
Again, another brilliant point. Yeah, having your teammates back doesn't mean that we're all going to stick up for you when something. It's different to that. It's like it's about accountability, and it's about we'll stick up for you each other if it's not your fault. But at the same time, if a mistake happens, you've got to own that. And you've got to. Yeah, no, I get you.
Yeah, and they need to, and the people you're working for. So your stakeholders from an HR perspective. When I back my team and they've made a mistake, there's accountability and ownership. The fact that we have done something wrong or something hasn't gone the way we wanted it to, or the way the stakeholder wanted it to. There's no blame shifting.
Yeah.
And then it's also ensuring that there's appropriate consequence management for the individual who has made the mistake, if it's necessary. Because in that way, your stakeholder also knows that you're holding your team accountable for what they deliver and what they do.
Yeah. And again, I will say this, you know this, but some of the other listeners might not know this, but dealing with as many companies as I have around the world, these are the mistakes that companies always make. They don't foster that environment, and they need to. So it's great that you had that. Well, I mean, maybe 90% of the time while you're at Deloitte. And I know from my experiences with Deloitte as well as a company that I've never worked there, but I know from dealing with them as a client and their involvement with the recruitment space and HR space, industrial relations, they're very hot on that. They're always showcasing events. When I was in Asia, they were always sponsoring things. They care about that industry quite a lot. So that's good. Then again, I don't want to, I know it's a big part of your life, but I want to get into the law bit because, and you mentioned this the other day on the thing that you sent, and it was interesting to read what you'd written because it's about, you were in professional services, largely they sell time, billable hours, etc. And it's quite often the case, well, certainly was in the past, where people then move into law or from law into that, dare I say it, the audit environment.
Yes.
I'm sure Deloitte wouldn't like me saying it, calling them auditors because they're much more than that.
They are.
But that's how I'll always know them, the big four. And moving into law, you got a lovely, juicy job as head of HR. And how was, please tell me, what was the change like? Why did you move and what was the change like?
I moved simply because I'd reached a ceiling at Deloitte.
Yeah.
Somebody had to retire or move on for me to be considered for a promotion, a next role. And
often happens.
Yeah. And it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And I felt like I needed a change. Having spent 15 years in that environment, I think it was time for a change. I'd also gone through some personal changes close to that time. And the timing was right, both from a personal and a professional perspective, to move on. I was then hired, as you say, as the head of HR for one of the big South African law firms. And I was quite blasé about it. And I thought, how difficult can this be? That we all charge for time. And in the consulting and the audit space, you do have some interesting personalities as well. But the legal industry is a completely different kettle of fish. It was a baptism of fire, to say the least.
Obviously, please share with me what you can.
Yes.
And I'll be, obviously we're not here to bash anyone at all, but please tell me what you can. I mean, I know, and I'll happily say that the difference is from a supplier perspective. Maybe it help you if I give you some example and put you at ease. As a supplier to the big firms and the big law firms, but also law firms of all shapes and sizes around the world, there are. I've always found with law firms that the personalities are so strong that it's actually in many cases can be very overpowering, and maybe less so in the investment banks and maybe some of the bigger consulting firms, because maybe it's due to the size, I don't know. But also when you find a market like the law here with the big five, I equate it very similarly to markets that we've worked in, like South Korea or Singapore before the internationals moved in, where it's very owned, the market, by those big five. Yes. And that creates kind of a small market within a big market, if that makes sense. And then then there's even more power when it comes to the personalities. Is that kind of what you were finding, that the very strong personalities that maybe were, I don't want to say in the way of progression, but in some cases they can be, because especially if they've had it and they've been so successful for so long, the idea of changing doesn't always sit well. Yeah. These are the types of things you were finding.
Yeah. So my observations after I spent a couple of weeks, maybe a few months, just absorbing everything. I think that lawyers in general are fairly conservative and don't like change. If it's not broken, don't fix it. So that's the one thing. But what I did observe was that people go to one of the big auditing firms for the brand. They don't go because so-and-so is an audit partner or is a consulting director in this particular space. Whereas people go to a lawyer because that individual is the best in their field. So when an audit partner or consulting partner leaves a big four auditing and consulting firm, he leaves or she leaves, and the team stays behind intact, and there's no threat to the client base. When the foremost expert in tax law, I'm going to use it as an example, decides to leave.
Because it's very specific.
Yeah, if you look at Michael Katz at ENS, if he decides to leave ENS, which is not going to happen, I don't have any inside information, it's just an example, it's likely that his whole team will move with him, And some clients, if they're not institutional clients, will strongly consider and or move with him too.
Yeah.
And that's why you get legal teams leaving and you get clients following lawyers if the nature of the relationship allows for it.
Yes.
And that then drives a very different dynamic in terms of power, which comes back to the example you were using. And sometimes that power is not used for the good of the industry or for the good of the law firm. It's used for the good of the individual.
100%, yes.
And many of us have heard it said, don't upset so-and-so because they're a big fee earner, we can't afford to lose them. Or so-and-so is leaving and then there's suddenly a big dilemma about, oh, sure, but are we going to be able to survive this person's departure because they generate big fees?
And by the way, just by saying that, everyone who's listening that's in the HR space has just been shouting in their car or wherever they're listening to, yes, I've been through this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or if somebody leaves and they're going to end up taking the whole team, the firm risks losing a revenue stream. Not just one client, but they risk losing a revenue stream. If one director leaves with his or her team members, and they leave, even if they don't take clients with them, the firm is going to lose revenue. So they're taking that into account then. One starts to understand better as to why there are big personalities, there are egos, and there is a level of arrogance. Yeah. Arrogance is not always a bad thing. So I'm not saying that as a negative. Arrogance is not a bad thing because lawyers need to have the confidence in their own abilities to be able to sell what they do to their clients and when they represent their clients for the opposing parties. But the ego and the arrogance and knowing that you're the best does sometimes drive a certain pattern of behavior that is not conducive to a good work environment.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and it's not. And to be fair to the law, it's not just the law as well. It's, it's any environment, be it front office investment banking, brokering, anything to do with sales, like a recruitment business, where a lot of it is centered around the individual, or the team. It can feed into some of the negative parts of human nature, which we all have, and that's and obviously you said made use of the word arrogance, and you're quite rightly saying it's not necessarily a bad thing. Certainly within professional services or law, if it's channeled in the right way, it can be hugely powerful to drive the success of the firm. But yes, what you're describing there is an environment that anyone listening to this will have been feeling or will have come across themselves in that law environment, and it is in that case, like you say, hugely different to the consulting firms. It's a massive change. But so it must have been quite a wake up. Don't be just.
No, it's fine.
We're in a mall here. As anyone who's listening that can't see the video, and it's slightly distracting when people walk past the blackened windows and look in. It sort of throws you a little bit.
At least aren't waving.
So hi. I'm not sure they can see us, but so look, I mean, that must have been quite a big wake-up call. Well, not wake-up call, but that must have been quite this is different. It
was definitely an eye-opener. The other difference I observed is that within the legal industry, we often reward individual excellence. We're not that good at rewarding team effort yet. I know that some of the bigger law firms have already started looking into, if they're not already doing it, to adding a team component to reward and remuneration. But when you're driving individual performance and achievement of an individual budget and rewarding that, then it also drives quite an individualistic behavior.
I couldn't agree more. And it's actually a phenomenon that we've seen, not in all countries, but largely in most countries, over the last, what are we in now, 2023? So certainly by the last 13 years, I would say. Post-global financial crisis, there was even more emphasis put on in a lot of the firms on the individual billing.
Yes.
I remember writing an article for a legal magazine back in probably 2011, 12, and interviewing a few partners in Hong Kong at the time and just saying, I believe like you've now got to be business developers, salespeople as well. And the pressure's only ramped up since then on the individual billing targets. And then we've seen lots of law firms who've changed their remuneration model. And some people will disagree with me, and I'm happy to be disagreed with, but I don't think for the better necessarily. Some firms, the large profit share split without any sort of base salary almost works for them. Great, and I'm glad it does work for you. But for other, it won't work for every firm, and I've seen it fail drastically. So that's like the real. That's like that's about as far as you can go when you're starting to reward individual performance, as you mentioned. Like, is that where you completely change the remuneration model and they take the lion's share of what they make? In some cases, and we've all seen it, where the firm, there's no camaraderie, there's no teamwork, there's no sharing of clients. They loathe to hire anyone and grow junior lawyers because it comes off their profit. And, I say it's worked for some firms, but I've seen it fail in many countries for many firms. So it's something that I'm sure you do as well when you're talking to your clients. I advise clients very carefully before they go down that route, because to be honest as well, once you've gone down that route, it's hard to get back.
It is very hard to get back, because if you're going to go down that road, you're going to end up losing people.
Yeah.
And then to reestablish your credibility and your reputation in the market and then rebuild, it's a deep hole to climb out of.
Yeah, and we're going to chop and change during the podcast, but on that note, one of the big changes in remuneration for lawyers has been this move away slowly from the lockstep model, which is about as necessary as moving away from billable hours, in my humble opinion. So very necessary. And we're seeing some of the big guys do it now. Even Cravath in the US, who invented it, have moved away from the Cravath model. Alan Overy obviously have just announced their merger with Sherman and Sterling. They moved away from it last year, perhaps as a prelude to it, but. And then I know some firms still have it, and if it works for them, great, but it doesn't work for everyone. So then I find law firms in general are finding that balance between rewarding the individual and also having a remuneration model that encourages longevity. It's a very difficult minefield. It's just one part of HR that's actually proving to be really difficult at the moment, is getting the remuneration right.
Yeah, remuneration is a challenge at a number of levels, because there's a lot of competition in the market. And last year and the year before, we saw extraordinary increases being given to lawyers in the US as well as in South Africa in some areas, where they significantly increased the salaries because of the competition in the market. There is a shortage of lawyers. There's a greater shortage of good lawyers, and they can almost command what they want. And that also gives rise to what we call job hopping. And the challenge with that, when you were talking about the depth of experience that I've got, the problem is when you're chasing a salary, you don't get the depth of experience that you need to become a really good lawyer, because you're doing superficial work for a year or 18 months, 2 years even, at a place, and then you're moving on. And probably operating at the next level. So it's not just salary, but promotion, because status is important in the legal industry. And then you're chasing a salary, you're chasing a title, and you're not getting the depth of experience that you need. And it's not about the old saying that law is a profession of time. Yes, it is. But there is a minimum amount of time that you should be spending to cement your knowledge and your base knowledge before you build on it. So if you're spending 4 or 5 years at most before you're becoming an experienced senior associate, there is going to be a gap in knowledge and expertise. And it will come back to bite you at some point.
Yeah, we've seen it. I mean, obviously we're sort of talking about lawyers at different levels of their experience. But if I take into consideration, my decade in Asia, as the need for Chinese language skills was becoming really apparent, because obviously the bulk of the work was coming from mainland China. We found younger lawyers really moving around for a pay rise, and those people are now looking at having 12 positions on their CV in 10 years, and from people I speak to, that's now becoming a struggle because they well, to use your term, they job hopped a little bit too much and maybe didn't go through the cycle as many times as they should have done in the same place, where you learn and you cut your teeth on, deals that fall flat or deals that don't go your way, or how to, when the successful deal comes through, you need, I think you always need about 3 or 4 years at the very least, with the same team and the same bosses almost, rather than moving every year. And dare I say it, I do see a little bit of similarities coming into the South African market, for not because of Chinese language skills this time, necessarily now, but for different reasons. And that is something I try to warn the younger lawyers about, if they care to take my advice, is just be careful, and I know that's strange coming from a recruiter, because clearly people would think that I would just want them to move all the time, but that's not the case. No. We want to work with them with their careers, and we want to help them. And some people listen, some people don't. But there's a couple of other things that there's a couple of things in there that I want to pick up on as well, and something you mentioned the other day as well, and because it's all interlinked and it all sort of goes in with the challenges that law, and I say law because I think in-house legal teams and law firms of all shapes and sizes, not just in South Africa, but across the African continent, they're all facing similar challenges. And one of the things that you put there, and I want to pick up on it, is that largely up until probably this year, or maybe last year, the law is, or the law industry, maybe because of the way that we've both described the sort of the inner workings, wasn't great at picking up on technology, and wasn't great, hasn't always been great at moving things forward. And, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And a lot of emphasis put on the individual person's knowledge. But that is changing, and it's changing rapidly in terms of the embracing of legal tech. Is that something that you've found within your client base and within the firms that you've worked for?
There is a reluctance to embracing legal technology and alternative service providers of legal services. Most traditional law firms believe or have the view that as long as they continue doing what they're doing and they do it well, the clients will come and or the existing clients will stay. The reality is that if your competitor is investing in legal technology and they can do something quicker, faster, cheaper, guess where your client's going to go? Over the last few years, there's been quite a lot of technology developed about automating due diligence to some degree, using AI to do basic drafting, providing subscriber-based legal services. So I need a contract for a sale of a vehicle, so I can go to Joe Soap on the internet and I can purchase tokens and I can download an agreement to sell a vehicle. So the more run-of-the-mill type of legal services, in time, and probably sooner rather than later, is going to end up being done either by AI completely or by some kind of alternative legal service provider.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And the thing is, if law firms are not alive to this, part of the reluctance to move that way is the cost of investing in legal technology. And most law firms in South Africa, I'm not sure about the models in other countries, they are incorporated businesses and there's a partnership where a lot of people have to agree to spend that amount of money before it can be invested in that particular technology. And I don't think everybody has line of sight of what the benefits down the road will be. And we've become an instant civilization. We want instant gratification. So return on investment in 5 years is not attractive. And also people sometimes struggle to envision what the law firm is going to look like and what they're going to do if they are cutting off part of their business to some kind of automated technology. Like, what are the CAs going to do if they're not drafting basic contracts, for argument's sake? And it's about understanding strategically what your business model will look like and what your services will look like when you embrace legal technology. It's like any technology implementation, whether you implementing an ERP system or legal tech or whatever. The nature of the skills that you require change. The number of people you need don't necessarily change or doesn't necessarily change, but the nature of the skills you need changes. And that's why it's important to have an understanding of what the impact of legal technology will be on our environment in order to ensure that we can reskill and skill up to run a business that is profitable using the legal technology.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's actually a few things in there that you've said that could really be unpacked as well, which is, if you relate it to the issues with some remuneration models that we just raised as well. If you've got a model where each lawyer is taking the lion's share of the fees that they generate, and then you turn around and go, oh, by the way, guys, can we just keep back 10% of everything because we need to invest in this new, you're going to get a big fat no from everybody, maybe 99% of the voters. Yes, and when you and depending on the structure of the law firm as well, there's going to be a lot of people who've got to agree, and as you say, rightly, they need to see the value. And if they don't believe it's going to affect their particular practice or the way that they are, or if they've got 5 years to retirement, or if they've got whatever, then they'll probably say no, and rightly so maybe, if they're just thinking about themselves and not the future of the firm. But I remember a podcast I watched the other day, the brilliant The Diary of a CEO. I don't know if you listen to it, but if you don't, I would advise you do. It's on YouTube and Spotify with Stephen Bartlett in the UK, and he had a guy on there called Matthew Syed, who's a business coach, actually an Olympic table tennis player, but then turned business coach. He specifically brought up a point about law firms, and he said if every partner isn't thinking about technology, so I'm paraphrasing now, and investing in technology, at least 75% of their day, they are seeing their value of their equity walking out the door. And that really hit home with me. I was like, I really need to send this to some of my clients, because that is really true. Now, look, let's caveat this with, and as I was talking to someone yesterday about, look, if you go on social media now, especially Twitter, and you type in AI, you're going to think we're already behind because the world has changed. Take it all with a little bit of a pinch of salt. We've all tried ChatGPT and Bard, and we know how they're failings at the moment, but things will get better. And not every single AI platform that is released will be valuable. Some will die a death, but some will become integral. And it's worth looking at. I remember listening to something like a webinar and calling, and I don't know which law firm it was, but it was one of the big five here. And they were saying, and I'm sure it's similar with a lot of other firms, that they've got they sort of embrace every time they get approached by a technology company, they embrace it. They say, yeah, let's trial it. And they get their lawyers to try it in an incubator. Yes. That's the right attitude to have. Absolutely. Try it, get feedback, see if we need it. Especially those that are young, the younger generation. Yes. There's also, the big driver for all of this, and I'm sure, hopefully you would agree, but I'm sure some will agree. The big driver for change will always be the cost. It's the clients will always drive the change. And you've kind of touched on it there when you said if your competitor is doing something faster, better and cheaper, then that's where the client's going to go. But I've also seen it in the other markets that we've worked in, where the clients are the ones who are putting the pressure on because they've got to cut costs as well. Costs as well. And that's where you see, and I see, and I'm sure you do as well, a lot of in-house teams, a lot of general counsels are early adopters of new technology. In fact, if you go to an in-house event, some people, and I will really advise anyone listening to this that's in practice to go to in-house events, not just to market and business develop with clients, but see what they're doing with technology, because they're under huge pressure to cut out external counsel and then reduce their own teams to the point where they are automating a lot of things. And that these are fundamental issues that are going to, if they're not already, they are going to affect the remuneration, the money that law firms are making, the work that they're asked to do, the way they deliver legal services, the size that they grow to, the people they employ. There's a lot in there. And I often do talks at some of the universities, and when I see somewhere like the University of the Western Cape with hundreds and hundreds of people graduating from law, and they're asking me questions on a webinar, where do we get work? How are we going to get articles? I'm like, I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was going to bring up on that in terms of technology as well, and I don't know if you see this, but I think jobs change with technology.
Yes.
And you sort of touched on it there, where you said that some of the lawyers might think, well, what are the CAs going to do? What are the younger attorneys going to do? Well, jobs change, things change. And I think some of those jobs that used to be, say, for instance, maybe paralegals or legal assistants will become more data-driven. There'll be technologists or there'll be data analysts. And so the jobs will change. The jobs will still be there, or jobs will still be there. Opportunities will still be there, but the shape of the law firm will change.
Jobs will definitely change. I mean, if we think about the last 20 years, how the role of a legal secretary's changed, for example. It's gone from typing a letter on a manual typewriter, maybe it's 25 or 30 years, typing a letter on a manual typewriter with carbon paper so that you have a copy, getting the director to sign it after he's changed it 3 times and you've retyped it 3 times, popping it in the mail. It takes 7 days to get to wherever it needs to go. If we think about how instant everything is nowadays, a lot of people in the law firms do their own letters and that kind of thing, because we largely work with templates, so the drafting and that kind of thing is pretty easy. Letters are also work off template formats, so that's also pretty easy. Electronic signatures, it gets inserted, you email it, it's done. So the secretary's role has changed significantly, and one would need to ask yourself, how do we reimagine that role? There will be a need for administrative support, but the pure secretarial kind of support, that role is diminishing more and more as the more tech-savvy people are coming into the legal industry. Our Gen Ys and Gen Zs are tech natives.
Yeah.
They won't know what to do with a manual typewriter. They think it belongs in a museum. So, and they've grown up with email, they've grown up with instant messaging. They've grown up, well, not necessarily grown up with, but you look at something like Telegram, which is also a pretty well accepted medium to use in the business world because it is safe and secure. So there's an expectation from the younger generation who are coming into the legal industry now that you will keep pace with what technology is doing. And if you don't keep pace with what technology is doing, you're likely to find that, well, they might move on. It won't be the only push factor, definitely won't be the only push factor. But when you look at a number of the reasons why people leave law firms, this might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Own the future of recruitment today. Access a secured, anonymized global talent pool. Connect with qualified candidates through multiple private label databases. By creating your own Stintit, you can achieve the following. Step 1. Access your company dashboard by logging in. Step 2. Click Find Candidate to search for the ideal candidate. To begin, create a new position and fill in the necessary details. The system will search through multiple databases to find the ideal match for you. Step 3. Once the search is completed, you will instantly receive multiple 100% matches, which have all been fully verified and KYC checked. Step 4. When the candidate chooses to opt in, you can view their skill set and experience. Only when you are satisfied, use your credit to unlock the candidate's full profile. Once unlocked, the profile remains unlocked for all future searches. What makes this system truly revolutionary is that when you search, the search will continue in all the different databases until a 100% match is found. Each database involved and the candidate share in the revenue. And that's how this circular revenue model and shared database benefit all parties involved.
Again, this is not the platform for me to mention names, but I speak to a lot of law firms, and one of the questions I often ask the partners or human resources is, so why should someone join you? I don't often get a very good answer, to be honest, because they haven't really thought it through. No. Or they'll give me the standard stock answer, which is, like more like a marketing brochure.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking that question is not to put anybody on the spot or make anybody feel difficult or uncomfortable. It's because these are the questions that these junior lawyers, well, not even junior lawyers, partners are now, 30 years old, 31, 32. These are the people that you're expecting to bring their book of business, their clients, their network. They know their network is their net worth. What are you bringing to them? Yeah. And there's still room for law firms to really improve that side of HR. And in fact, I had a conversation with some HR professionals the other day, and I was trying to get that across that, you may disagree, and please do if you do, but I see the value of human resources consultants like you or human resources departments coming in to help some of the law firms. Not necessarily always on the recruitment front, but certainly on the retention front. Yeah. And that's really where HR, I think, can really play a big role in getting people to stay. On that note as well, one of the things, and we won't touch on it just in too much detail now, but one of the things that I do talk to a lot of partners about, especially, is when it comes to recruitment, is maybe to just change their lens a little bit when it comes to how long you think that person's going to stay with you. Mm-hmm. Because, again, I speak to a lot of law firms of all shapes and sizes through the country every week. And I often ask that question, what are you going to do if John leaves? And John is a fictitious John, obviously. And the answer is often, well, I hadn't really thought about that. No, I thought he'd stay here, we'll probably make him a partner in 3 or 4 years. So, but what does John want? Mm-hmm. Because John is of the age where 2 years is almost like a decade. Yeah. So I'm actually working with a lot of law firms at the moment in terms of the recruitment part, in terms of why don't we look at it in 2-year tranches? Like, what do you need them to do? And what are they going to need by way of technology or platform or support to get to those revenue targets that you need them to get to? Little bit, I always use the sporting analogy, and I always say it's a little bit like soccer, football in my country, but soccer here. When Liverpool, my team, go to sign a new striker, they don't start thinking of him as being potentially the next manager. They think of him, they sign him on a 4-year contract or a 3-year contract to hit certain targets that will lead to successful winnings of cups and things like that. And I think there's an area in there, and just change of lens, where younger lawyers can get the training still, they can get their support, they can get good technology, and they can hit those very high targets. But then the law firm is already preparing for them to potentially move on.
Yeah. There are a couple of interesting things that you've mentioned there, and if I convert that into HR talk, the first thing is, what is your value proposition? What is your employee value proposition? Why should someone want to come and work for you?
Yeah. Is that something you work on, by the way, in your consultancy?
Yes, absolutely. It's identifying an employee value proposition for the different segments of your workforce. You don't have one value proposition for everyone. So in the legal industry, for example, you would have a value proposition for the students coming in as articled clerks. You would then have a value proposition for people who are operating at an associate level, a senior associate level, and then those who go on to be directors and senior directors. A lot of law firms nowadays have the model where they become salary directors and then become equity directors down the road when they meet certain financial targets. And at every segment, there is something specific that would hook that person and increase the likelihood that they will stay.
Yeah.
You cannot realistically retain all the CAs that you train. So you need to then make sure that those that you do retain are the best are the cream of the crop, and that they will be prepared to stay for maybe the next 3 years, which is generally the duration that people operate at an associate level. The cost of losing somebody that you have trained as a CA, this is just the cost of them leaving, in their first year post admission in South Africa is in the region of about 2.5 to 3 million rand.
The cost to you?
The cost to the law firm for one CA who's been retained, who leaves within the first year of retention, leaving, is about 2.5 million rand. That's what you're losing in terms of your investment in that person's training, in that person's salary, and
replacement.
That's not the turnover cost.
Oh, really?
That's purely the cost of them leaving.
That's incredible.
Okay, because most law firms pay for the cost of board exams. They pay for the oh goodness, now I can't remember what the program is. PLT. They pay for PLT. They pay for the board exams. They give them paid time off to study. They train them, so they are generally being trained, coached on the job every single day for 2 years. That's what they do.
So you're losing a little bit of. Are you including the time that's spent training them and the support?
Yes,
and,
the associate or senior associate or director time that's spent coaching and guiding a CA.
Yeah, I can believe that.
So you're looking on a conservative estimate at about 2.5 million rand.
If they leave you, you retain them, and if they leave you within that first year, and you're not working on that retention piece, or some dastardly headhunter comes along and takes them away. I say that with a tongue in cheek, obviously. Then you're losing close to 2.5 million rand per person.
That's roughly what you're losing. Then, of
which
course,
at current exchange rates about £1. But no, I'm joking. But after yesterday's interest
it did
rate
tank
hike,
a bit.
No, it's a significant chunk of change,
Yeah.
and I can see that because actually on a much wider scale, we did some research recently for our research company did it, and we looked at just the US, and recruitment is $1 trillion business.
Yes.
It becomes a $3 trillion cost per annum in the US. For replacement, go slow, bad morale, retraining, hiring someone. You get into, I know we're not touching on that, but trillions of dollars is being lost. And the thing is, if you take, I'm going to bring it back to South Africa, but if you take into consideration, right, according to the Law Society's latest statistics, there's almost 40,000 registered attorneys in South Africa. There's almost 16,000 law firms. There's only a small handful of law firms that are over 50 people.
Yes.
The bulk of this industry is made up of small firms, one person operations, 1, 2, 3, or 5 plus.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money to lose if you're not keeping hold of those people. And the smaller firms, of which they make up clearly about 97% of the industry here, that's money they can't really afford to lose.
No, I mean, they might take one candidate attorney in per year or every second year. It depends on their business model. If their business model is not to retain but just to train, well, then that's what they've signed up for.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I talked about this with an HR person yesterday, and we were specifically talking about their firm, and I said, I can't see what the strategy is. But if the strategy is just to train and lose, because that's fine for... Yeah. But but it can be a strategy sometimes, can't it?
It can.
Yeah.
Or it could be a mix of we recruit X number of those, this amount is to train and that amount is to retain. And then that's how you kind of work it out. But to come back to where we started, the employee value proposition is like really important, and you have to have one for every single segment of your employee population in order to make sure that they are kept interested and they are kept engaged. I've mentioned the cost of turnover, the cost of losing somebody up front in terms of loss of investment than what you were referring to as a cost of turnover. And the research indicates that you can probably look at about 30 to 40% of cost to company in terms of the cost of replacing somebody who's left. And that speaks to the lack of productivity, the pressure it puts on other people, the cost of actually placing that person if you're using an agency, et cetera, et cetera. That you're probably looking 30 to 40% of that individual's cost to company.
And then, we go a step further, and the cost of getting that new person in and making sure that they're trained right.
Yes.
And,
getting them productive in the shortest space of time, the impact that a new person has on the team dynamic, which means the rest of the team might become a little bit unproductive for a period of time while they, form, norm, and storm, or storm, norm, and form.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I often say to our clients is that the cost of recruitment isn't my fee.
No.
It's everything. It's all of these things that you're mentioning. So, I agree.
The challenge is a lot of these things are invisible costs. So people don't necessarily feel it in their back pocket immediately.
They don't have to sign an invoice for it.
No. Yeah. And I don't think many people actively measure it. So if HR people are going to want to add value into the business and make a business case for retention strategy, then this is how you do it. You indicate how much the law firm is losing in terms of turnover with loss of investment up front, and then you work out how much it's costing you to have people leave using these rough numbers. It's not an exact science. You can be conservative. You can even say 20%. If you've lost 15 people, it's going to cost you a pretty packet.
And I know I want to stay on this point, but just to bring it back to your career very quickly, because you've worked a couple of times. You've worked for yourself. I can see from but you've now got your own consultancy,
That's correct. Yes,
which you launched last year.
Yes, last year, late July, Landerson Management Consulting was born.
Excellent.
And I started operating on the 1st of September last year, so that is now what I do to keep my time busy.
And we will have all of your links to all of your contacts underneath this as well, so people can reach out to you. But the work that you're doing and that you did at the two major law firms that you work for, and now that you're offering to clients, is around this space, is it? Or partly, maybe?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's across the HR value chain, but employee value propositions, retention strategies, succession planning. And succession planning, people often their eyes glaze over because I think it's such a tedious process. It doesn't have to be tedious. It is as simple as, if John leaves, what do we do? You don't need to
John is going to leave.
Yeah.
At some point.
It's not like saying, okay, so this person is a CEO. Now we need to figure out who are the most likely people to succeed this person, and how many years are they away from being able to take over that role. That's not what succession planning needs to be about. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah. It can be as simple as, this team consists of 2 directors and 6 associates, mixed between associate, senior associate, maybe a couple of CAs. What does their business pipeline look like, and what are they going to need in the future? What do they do if one person leaves, if 2 people leave? It's quite simple. It's basic workforce planning, actually.
Yeah.
So planning your workforce, understanding where your succession lies, who are your critical skills, or who have the critical skills, who can you absolutely not afford to lose, because if they leave, that skill set walks out the door and you can no longer service your client. So those are the kind of questions HR people, or conversations HR people should be having with their stakeholders, to be able to proactively help them manage their teams and proactively manage their staffing.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, one of the mistakes I think some of the HR departments make here, and just from what I've seen, and I'm not going to name names, but if you compare to some of the HR teams here in South Africa to what I've seen overseas, a lot of the times the HR teams won't even get involved in the recruitment process. They might get involved at the end with psychometric testing, and they might even have the final say from a culture perspective, which I actually agree with. But they're much more focused on, what does that person need to be a success? How do we retain that person? And they're much more focused on keeping those people there. Whereas here I see a little bit too much of, they're at the front end. Yeah. They're really trying to, it's almost like the partners have turned around and go, okay, well, you're HR, so you deal with recruitment as well. And I don't actually think that, personally, I don't think that's where their efforts are best spent. It's an investment decision at the end of the day. So that should still be the line managers or partners decision, but then HR should really focus on that, or bring in consultants like yourself who can help develop that value proposition, which I think is so vital to the future success of any firm.
Yeah. To their credit, the 2 law firms I've worked with do involve partners in the decision making in terms of recruitment for students, and it is critically important because they ultimately decide who is the future of the firm. I do think that there's some room for improvement in terms of the criteria based on which they recruit. There's a lot of emphasis placed on academic success. And the person who's getting golden key, who's been admitted to golden key and that kind of thing, is not always going to be your best lawyer. They're a good academic, they're a good researcher. But can they apply that knowledge practically and functionally in terms of solving a client's problem? And that is critically what one needs to start looking at. What you also need to start assessing is, what is this person's ability to adapt to change? Because one thing we know for sure is that this world changes practically on a daily basis, and in the legal industry as well as in the professional services industries, and I'm sure in many others, my to-do list that I set out this afternoon, when I shut down my computer, when I log in tomorrow morning, it's changed. And a lot of people struggle to adapt their minds. So flexibility, adaptability, resilience, those are critical skills that people need to have. And we don't necessarily consciously measure that ability.
And we're talking about an industry that doesn't really like change. Exactly. Which is why when I said to you off camera earlier, I was talking to an HR team recently, and I said, and I left them with, I actually think your job is harder than ever before. I think the challenges that HR have going forward in law specifically, which is obviously my area of expertise, I think they've got the biggest challenges I've ever seen. And just in the last 5 to 10 minutes that we've been talking about, we've been talking about 4 or 5 different areas that you clearly understand as a high class and highly experienced professional, but there's so many challenges that are who are we hiring? What's their adaptability like to change? Like you say, I've never worked in a time quite like this where my to-do, sometimes I don't even write the to-do list out. There's literally no point. Let's just deal with what comes in. All those, it's like writing a business plan, as I'm sure you did with for your consultancy. I always laugh whenever I write a business plan, because on day one, you might as well just tear it up and throw it away. Although sometimes it's nice to read and go, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And then you talk about the value. How do you attract? What is the value proposition? And I still think, go back to that little point I made, I still think too many firms aren't doing enough succession planning at every level, in every team, like you mentioned there. But also because I think their expectations are that the person is going to stick around forever. And actually, if they change their lens a little bit and actually do it in tranches, you instantly protect your practice, you instantly protect... you're actually a bit more relaxed, and you actually train your staff a little bit better. And I've seen that firsthand. I did the same thing. So, but I go back to that the point I make often, which, and I'm going to mess his name up now, but I think it's Hans Helmut Kotz, is an economist. He works with Deloitte and various other firms, and is a great speaker. And he always mentions human capital is the biggest investment you can make. And it's still the same true. Obviously, even with all of the technology coming through, it is a good friend of mine who's got about as much experience as we have. She's in Australia. She used to be head of HR for Morgan Stanley. She always says to me, HR people need to be investment managers. They are investment advisors. If they're going to be involved in the recruitment and retention sector, then they need to be concentrating on, like, they need to know this is an investment, and what are we going to make out of that? Like, much the same as it would be in front office banking. But you, in terms of your consultancy and the work that you're doing, these issues that you mentioned about value proposition and bringing in the right people with the right skills, adaptability, golden keys, fantastic. Well done to anybody out there who's listening, who's got it. And you have to go some to get as many degrees and qualifications as Lynn has, but keep going, keep improving. But what I want to get into some of the issues, because you're on the front line. You're seeing there's very little in HR that you haven't already seen, which I think makes you incredibly valuable. So everybody out there who's listening to this needs to be connecting with you on LinkedIn, reaching out to you, seeing where they can work with you, and what expertise you can bring into the firm, even if it's one area of the firm, I suppose. But what I want to get into what you think are some of the big challenges. We may have already touched on them again, so happy to repeat ourselves. Certainly for law firms in the HR space, and what are you seeing? I know it's hard to say, but over the next 1 to 3 years, what do you think the biggest challenges are going to be?
I think diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is a very, very important topic that we haven't spent a lot of time on, but we could probably do 3 podcasts on that alone.
Yeah, happy to.
I've been reflecting on this quite a lot. In South Africa, we've had legislation that has required us to get the numbers right.
Yeah.
Not many organizations, and I'm talking in general now, not specifically legal industry, have managed to move beyond the numbers game. There's a superficial attempt at making sure that what people see optically represents what is expected. I'm not saying that people that are placed in senior positions are tokens. Everybody that I've come across who's in a senior position is absolutely qualified and legitimately where they are. But it's about the heart. It's about the DNA of the organization changing. So my experience with law firms is that they often have a culture of assimilation, which means that as long as I look, speak, do what the senior managers do and the leaders do, and in South Africa, unfortunately, most of those are white Anglo-Saxon men. So as long as I fit into that mold or that picture of success, then I will do well in this organization. Whereas we should be moving towards more of a culture of integration, which means that if I don't look, sound, do what the leadership are doing, I'm still accepted for who I am, for the value that I bring.
Yeah.
And we need to make a heart change in terms of inclusion and belonging. And I think that inclusion and belonging are probably, for me, the 2 most important aspects. Because if you get inclusion and belonging right, your diversity and equity will come right.
I think you're right. I think just on from what I've seen and what I have talked about, it's a conversation that we often have at GRM Towers, because Keen Rob again wants to know, and I ask questions all the time. I exhaust my poor teammates, where who are all from very different backgrounds. White, black, Indian, Durban, Joburg, Cape Town, and I ask them so many questions every day. We do get some work done occasionally, but I want to know what are the issues, what are they facing, what have they faced in the past, and you touched on you mentioned the word there, DNA of some of the law firms and other corporates as well, I suppose, in terms of changing that DNA. And I think some of the things that my teammates say as well is that there's no point in having a DEI strategy unless you truly believe in it as a firm.
Absolutely.
Like don't pay lip service. Don't just do it because you've been told to tick a form. Do you really believe in it? If you really believe in it, it'll come shining through. People aren't stupid. People will feel it. And it can have such a positive impact on the firm and retention and recruitment and clients and but people will see through it if you don't really believe it. And I guess in the past, with all the firms that you've dealt with, you will have seen both sides, firms who do it well, or you've helped them implement a strategy that's done well, and firms who maybe the senior partners or whatever aren't paying enough attention to it.
What I have seen is that there's often a genuine commitment of a few key leaders to make a difference and to do it the right way. But where it falls flat is that is that they, who are all the directors, and them, who are all the employees, are not on the same page. So you can have your management committee or your supervisory board or your exco all aligned to pursue a particular DEI strategy. But if every single person doesn't live that every single day, it's not going to be successful. And you can see which people who are good leaders get it right organically. And you can see the leaders who don't get it right organically because they're not necessarily good leaders. Which brings me to another topic that I'll just digress slightly on, and that is that law firms are not good at investing in leadership development. They don't measure leadership development and people's impact on others when they consider promotion to partnership.
Because it's a fee-earning business.
It is yeah. But if you don't treat your team well, or others don't observe you treating people well, you're going to get a revolving door. So there is a cost implication to having partners who are not singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of their day-to-day behavior.
Which then knocks into company culture, success, longevity, client relationships, because everyone sees it. I couldn't agree more. I can see it.
I've reflected on culture quite a lot since I've started my own business, and to me, culture was always this big intervention that you start from the top down because culture comes from the top down. And I've changed my perspective on that. And you need a purpose around what you want to do from a DEIB perspective. And that comes from the top down. But how you integrate that into day to day is you actually go into each and every team. You work at a team level because each team has a subculture to the main firm culture or the departmental culture. And you need to make sure that those small components of the bigger whole are moving in the right direction so that everybody can move in the right direction.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a book, you've just made me think about it. I don't know if you've read it, and I implore everybody to get it from Take A Lot if they can, or any other good bookstore. Mm-hmm. It's called The Score Will Take Care of Itself. Mm-hmm. And it's by Bill Walsh, who is an American football NFL coach. And it's his book on leadership and management. Yeah. And some of the things that struck with me was like when he took over the San Francisco 49ers, as he did in the 70s and 80s, he went and met everyone, every cleaner, every ticket seller, I can't even think of the word, teller to get into the stadium, every single person who worked for the organization, and explained to everybody what it meant to work for this organization, and spent so much time doing that, to the point that when they all grew together from every angle. And that's a book I highly recommend all leaders should read. Yeah. And it does have obviously we're specifically talking about DE&I, but from a culture perspective, it's good tips to follow.
Yeah, and the reason why that leadership development and the inclusion and belonging is important to me is because there's been an increased focus on employee wellness.
Yeah,
we are hearing more and more about people who are having challenges with mental health, and we're also hearing about a lot of people who have burnout. Burnout comes from being in what you experience as a toxic work environment, and what one person experiences as a toxic environment is different to another. So what I often hear is, it's not me, it's that person because everybody else in the team is okay. I'm not saying the leader is always at fault, but there's a contributory factor somewhere along the line. And when we look at employee wellness, I think the focus has increased for a number of reasons. The first one is that there's been a lot of publicity about it, and people are becoming more comfortable to speak of it. In the legal industry, people are still terrified to speak of it because they see it as a weakness, and they think it's going to be exploited, and then they're going to be victimized.
But I agree with you. And anybody who's listened to my podcast for the last few years knows that we've covered it, mental wellness, at least twice, specifically with Frida Levitsky, who's ex-partner that moved into life coaching for lawyers. And here in South Africa, and it's something that's close to my heart as well. I've worked in high-pressured cities, high-pressured environments,
Yes.
commission-only environments for the most of my career, and I've seen and had it myself, elements of burnout and mental wellness issues, as we all do. And like you say, it's only in the last few years, and maybe that will be a good thing that will come out of the COVID situation,
Yes.
that people are more willing to talk about this. But we are at a crossroads, I think, with the law and probably investment banking and other highly pressurized, highly, dare I say, egotistical environments.
Absolutely.
Where there's a crossroads between the old school, what I always call the New York attitude, where it was churn and burn.
Yes.
And when you burn, you get replaced by someone else that will get burnt out. And there is a culture change in law overseas. I certainly see it. Maybe it will reach here eventually, or maybe it is happening, where there is more emphasis being put on the wellness part. But you think that there's specifically a link between that and the DE&I side of things as well?
Especially when one looks at inclusion and belonging. Because we say that we want you to bring your whole self to work, but don't tell me if you have depression, and don't tell me that you're burnt out. So, and also don't tell me that you're LGBTQIA+. Okay, I understand that that is a thorny issue, especially in some African countries where being homosexual is illegal.
Yeah.
It's a criminal offence. So I understand how difficult that is.
And other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I also understand that, for some of the bigger law firms in South Africa who have offices in those countries or who have associations in those countries, there's pressure on them to articulate to the people in South Africa, for example, what are we doing to support our colleagues in those countries? That's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not going to offer one because I'm not sure what it is.
It's a conversation, isn't it?
Inclusion and belonging for me is also something that I believe has become or should become a focus area. Because if you get the inclusion and belonging right,
if we're going to say to people, you got to bring all of yourself, and at the more senior level, yourself, your reputation, your client base, your team. If you can't really bring your full self to work, then you're not included. You're not belonging, in a way.
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding soppy, we need to demonstrate grace and compassion towards our colleagues and our peers.
100%.
Because that makes us more human, and we are human after all.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It doesn't sound soppy at all. It's something we talk about a lot. Again, at the GRM group, we talk about all of this, showing compassion for each other, putting each other first, genuinely doing it.
Yes.
This is just me and the way that I work with my teammates, but I encourage people to be completely and utterly themselves. I'm going to be 100% honest with them. And I'm not just talking about, I've had a bad day. I'm talking about what's going on in your life, what's going on in your world, what's making a difference. Because if you can help them in any way, shape or form, if you really want, and I'll flip it back to results. If you want them to work their best and then help them to be their best, is the way that we go about it. So, and I think maybe some of the bigger law firms, maybe even, maybe I shouldn't single out the bigger law firms. Maybe it's law firms in general are really struggling with that crossover now.
Yeah, I think what people struggle with sometimes is many lawyers are problem solvers by nature. So if I go to my leader and I say to him, geez, I'm having such a hard time with this and this and this, I don't know what to do. The instinct is, I need to help you solve the problem. But that's not always what you need to do. You need to listen.
Sounds like a marriage.
And you need to empathize. I won't equate it to a marriage.
I was going to say, my wife's always, I just want you to listen. But I want to help.
Yeah. So being able to listen and be empathetic and caring while you're doing that, and not necessarily trying to solve the problem for the person. That's a good starting point.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to listen to someone bearing their soul, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with tears, for example. I think there are 2 occasions when I've cried in the work environment, and I did in the ladies' room. I've had many people cry in my office before. I used to have
2 out of 30 years isn't bad.
Yeah, no. I used to have a box of tissues on my desk permanently because people would come into my office, they'd close the door and they just let it go. And you need to learn to be able to listen and empathize with people, empathize with people and let them feel heard, because often they just want to be heard.
Yeah, and it actually, for me, it also goes, and I'm putting my employer hat on here, someone who's built teams and built a business as well as, for clients. It actually goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning as well. There's a part to play in setting expectations from the very beginning with recruitment. There are firms out there, and I won't mention any names, that are still that old school, high-powered, we're doing big deals, we've got to smash it, we've got to work till 3 a.m. And that's fine. But my advice is don't dress yourself up as anything else.
Yes.
And actually go and hire the people that want that. Because there are still people that want that. They want that New York environment or London environment. Great, but work with the recruiter or take your time to find the right people. Don't try to dress yourself up as something that you're not. Because, and again, that's somewhere where I think some of the firms we work with especially are still struggling. They want to be seen as a highly inclusive, we have this, we have that, but actually behind the scenes when the person sits down, they're getting beasted. Yeah. It's like, well, why don't we just tell them from the beginning and find someone who doesn't mind working those hours?
But apart from that, when you're having people working hectic hours, because there are some areas within the legal industry that, when you're closing deals in the banking and finance space, you're working until 3 o'clock every morning until the deal's closed.
Yeah.
But then what do we do afterwards? Do we give people time out to rest and restore themselves? Or do we expect them then to come back the immediate next day? They went to bed, they left the office at 3 o'clock this morning. They went home, had an hour and a half of sleep, showered, got dressed. Now we expect them to be back in the office and be productive and functional. You can't do that. Yeah,
and again, anyone who's listening to this may have worked for me in the past. I have been like that a decade ago when I was in Hong Kong. The environment was largely like that. The city drove you to be like that, and it was you work till midnight or beyond. That you close the deals as you can, and then you're back at it the next day. And if you're not, where's your teammates? Get back at it and until it burns out. But there's no longevity in that.
No.
And actually, in the end, I think, just from what I've seen, is that you might slip on the quality sometimes as well. If you're not really taking your time and trying to rush it through, but you will also lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I just want to go back to that point about DE&I again, because you make a really valid point about that sort of belonging and inclusivity and how it should really be central to the culture and the strategy of the firm, really.
Yes.
And especially, you make a really good point there, and I'm going to take this away when we leave later, when I let you leave at some point, if you're expecting someone to bring them their full self to work and to give you everything, then they have to be able to be in an environment where they can be their full self.
Absolutely, it needs to be acceptable, and it needs to be accepted. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes you're going to hear stuff that you wish you never heard. When somebody comes to you and says that their partner beat them last night.
Yeah.
That is stuff you don't necessarily want to hear about or get involved in. But it's not your problem to solve. But you need to hear the person. You need to be able to perhaps refer them to appropriate resources where they can get help. Some of the big law firms have employee assistance programs through ICAS and other service providers. And it's important to encourage someone in that situation to actually seek the help they need. You cannot solve that problem for them. You cannot make them get out of that situation unless they want to.
No.
You might hear of somebody who is addicted to hard drugs.
Fairly common in high-powered jobs.
I believe that drug use within the legal industry is more common than what we'd like to think.
Well, the American Bar Association did a huge study on it, I think 2 years ago. Again, I spoke to Frida about it, and we touched on it in one of our past pods. And Yeah, the numbers were phenomenal. And again, that was just America, but then there's a fair reflection.
Yeah.
You can assume that most of the drug use, suicide,
addiction,
humongous numbers, like frighteningly big numbers.
And and I think as leaders, people are sometimes afraid to deal with those matters or listen to them or hear them. But it's about understanding what resources are at your disposal to help that person. You don't have to solve the problem, So be prepared to hear stuff that you might not be comfortable with. As any good psychologist, I'm not suggesting we are psychologists, but as any good psychologist, have a debriefing if you need to. It's just so that you can manage the impact of some stuff that might be shared with you. I'm not saying everybody's sharing heavy stuff. If you talk to me, I'll tell you about all the interesting things my boys do. So, that might perk up your day. But it's just about allowing people to be. You can't expect the best from someone if you expect them to hide themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The diversity and equity, as it's listed now, is something that I've been involved with since, probably for the last decade or more. In the UK, not in the UK, in Hong Kong, mainly around gender equality.
Yes.
As was the big issue in Asia and major Asian cities. I think when I joined the board of the Women's Foundation in Hong Kong, the numbers were like there was 1% female on boards of listed companies in the city, which at that time was the 5th largest financial district in the world. And I was like, this isn't right. Yeah. And there was issues with gender pay and things like that. So it's something that I know a little bit about and have been involved in myself. And I think, what you're saying there really resonates with business leaders like myself and people that employers. And it's something that I think from my experience, when I was working in that space, too many people were very quick to just brush it under the carpet and go, oh, that topic again. And actually, it's really core to the center of your success if you get it right.
Yes.
But again, go back to what some of my colleagues have said. If the firm or the client that we're dealing with can be clearly seen that they don't really believe in it, then why are they doing it in the first place? And that's actually where they need to then look at the people they've got working there, the whole culture. They really need to work on it. And why do you really need to work on it? Because it's proven to be much more successful for the business if you get that right. There's a million studies on Google. Just Google it and see what the very clever people at very clever universities and workplaces and consultant firms like Deloitte have done. It works if you get that right. And ultimately, you'll have the right people working in the right firm who are supportive. Or if you've got your platform that's, the old New York style beasting it, but you've got people who love that as well. Yeah. You've got the right people in, as the famous author Jim Collins would say, you've got the right people on the right bus sitting in the right seats. Yeah. And that's ultimately what
being paid the right price.
Being paid the right price, yes. And we could talk about for another 15 hours about remuneration and salaries, especially in South Africa. Okay, so DE&I, big topic, big area of expertise for you, clearly, something that you're obviously working with on your client base. Just out of interest, your clients at the moment, are they still mainly in law or are you spread out? Or
I'm spread out. I actually have clients in mining, in logistics and in, another professional services. And then I'm also subcontracting to another consulting firm, HR consulting firm.
Oh, right.
So
all in it together.
All in it together, yes.
Well, that's brilliant. I mean, that's because a lot of it is universal, I suppose.
HR is HR. The principles of HR are applicable across industries. It doesn't matter whether you're mining or retail or professional services. It's all the same. Healthcare. I mean, yes, your governance might be different in some areas. Some of the specifics might be a bit different, but HR is HR. That's sometimes a double-edged sword because everybody thinks they can do HR.
Yes. Yeah, a bit like my industry as well.
Yes.
Everybody thinks they can do it.
How hard can it be?
Yes, exactly. I've just got LinkedIn. That's all I need. Yeah,
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, well, come back to me in 6 months
Yeah.
when you've wasted another R1 million.
There we go.
Yes, bring in the experts. I agree. Okay, what else is in the HR space, do you think, going forward?
Yeah.
Can you see that's a real challenge, do you think? Well, maybe in law or anything.
Well, I think inclusion and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, as we've said, is important, no matter which industry you're in. It's important. It's not only important in South Africa, it's important in Europe, it's important in the US. And it's not just, what one also needs to remember is it's not just about belonging, but it's also important to look at the more technical aspects around pay equity. So one shouldn't lose sight of that. That's more of the nuts and bolts process kind of thing. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the increase in use of legal technology, we've had a conversation about that already, and the impact that'll have. So I think it's really important for law firms to have a strategy around legal technology so that they have a roadmap and they're not making it up as they go along. Because it affects your business development, it affects your skill set, it affects your people. If you're suddenly going to implement a technology that'll affect a certain group within the organization, that immediately creates uncertainty. And that then obviously has an impact on productivity, et cetera, et cetera. And before you know it in the market, you hear that you're retrenching 50% of your workforce when that was never discussed. So stories get legs and they become bigger and bigger. It's a snowball running down a hill. So avoid those, have a strategy, communicate your strategy, make sure everybody understands what you want to do around legal technology. The other thing is wellness. We've touched on that briefly as well, but wellness is quite a big subject. Excuse me. There's an ISO standard that's been released in relation to wellness. Okay. And it looks at your health and safety, your workman's compensation, and all. Well, in our language, it'd be workman's compensation, but it's a similar concept because obviously ISO is an international standard. And then it also looks at integrating your HR people practices and your people management practices to support wellness overall. So that also brings a different lens to how you view wellness. People think wellness and then they say, okay, we need an employee assistance program. So we need somebody that our staff can phone when they have psychological problems or they think they're having psychological problems, when they have conflict, whether it be at work or interpersonal relationships, when they have financial issues, where they can find information, et cetera, et cetera. But wellness is more than just that. And it then also feeds into how you treat people, what is their lived reality in your workspace every day, which then goes back to inclusion and belonging. And that's why I believe that those are all very closely related. We always operate in a system. And when one thing in a system changes, it has an influence or an effect on the different components of the system. And depending on what the component is, the impact might be big or it might be small or it might be negligible. But because we are a knowledge-based industry in the legal industry, you cannot work without people.
Yeah, again, going back to the statement by Hans Helmut Kotz about human capital being your biggest investment.
Absolutely.
I completely agree. I think there's one message that I try to get through as well related to this, to a lot of the law firms that I speak to. Again, we're talking about people who are older than me, who've been around the industry a long, long time, and it's always seen it work. And, how do you tell a partner of a law firm that's making billions of rand that things are changing?
Yeah.
I can tell you now, I can tell everybody now, and I say this to all the law firms, is that I've seen it, it's coming, it's a slow moving change. I saw it in Asia, I saw it in the Caribbean and the Americas before that, I saw it in the UK and Europe before that, and I see it here. Clients don't want to pay those bills anymore. No. And the revenue that law firms are making is nothing to do with recessions and because, I always joke that since I've come here, South Africa's always been in a permanent recession, the most resilient country in the world, I love it, with the most resilient people. it's because legal services are being delivered in a different way, and clients are looking for value, and that will have an impact. And I think some law firms are starting to feel it. From what the meetings I've had recently, there are changes afoot, and that means that all of this becomes even more relevant. Your staff, their wellness, the integration, everything we've talked about on this podcast is vital to the continued success of your business. You can't just go, okay, well, we'll just cut our fees. You can't. That's a race to the bottom.
Yes.
But legal services are being delivered are being delivered in a different way, or clients certainly want them delivered in a different way. That brings in the advent of technology, but also, and you touched on it in the thing that you kindly wrote for us the other day, when you brought in Gen Z and Gen Y,
yes,
right, which is 75% of the workforce now, right? So we're talking about people who've grown up in a very different way. The neural pathways are different. They absorb information quicker, faster, and then move on quicker, faster. They're different species,
that's it, yes.
Different people, and they're the bulk of your workforce. And again, the names will remain nameless, but a very senior lawyer said to me the other day, "What are we going to do with all of these Gen Z, Gen Y people?" Like as if he didn't have a clue. I literally bit my hand and sort of, I don't know what to say to you. Like you've got to try and understand your workforce, how they like to deliver their services, and bring in your expertise and the best of that, and train them. But don't train them necessarily the way that you want. You did it, because it has changed. And that brings me on to the way of work. And you may have seen, and if you haven't, I'll send it to you. But we did some research recently, and we released a smaller paper based on a big research piece that we did, which was basically looking at the way that people want to work. And COVID's been a big advocate for that. And the law has been hit hard from a changing perspective. People want to deliver things in different ways. So if your clients are pushing down fees and they want legal services delivered in a different way, and the workforce that you can attract want different things from you as an employer and want to work in a different way, you've got to change if you want to protect your revenue. Yes. Otherwise you are, and then the advent of technology, you've got to embrace all three of those things, and it's all based around people. Like
it's absolutely all based around people. So the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs also comes back to the observation that we made around people not wanting to necessarily aspire to partnership, because they want something different out of life. Yes, there might still be some of them who want to be a partner someday. They might want to be a really skilled, recognized technical lawyer, but they might not want to be a partner. So how do we create alternative career paths in the legal industry for people? And then how do we build those people out? I don't think many of the law firms have mastered that yet or got the answer yet. The two law firms I've been with, they started talking about it, but they haven't quite finished it. I think the one might have made some progress. But for the most part, there seems to be this denial that you can't not want to be a partner, really. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But that is the reality. And it's likely that the Gen Zs that are entering the workplace now, or have been entering for the last 2 or 3 years, they're likely to have more than 2 careers in their lifetime. They're not afraid to leave. They're not afraid to resign with nothing to go to.
Yeah, and don't forget as well, they see largely as they're coming through the ranks that so much emphasis is put on fee earning. They're sitting there going, well, that's not me. I want to be a technical lawyer. I want to be better. I want to be a master of my craft. I don't want to be chasing clients down the road for money. I know I'm being sarcastic, but so again, they're moving further away from that desire to be a partner, and the partners might be going, well, why wouldn't you want to be? Well, you're not making it look hugely attractive, to be honest. And then just, sorry to dive in, not necessarily in the law in this country, but certainly globally, redundancies.
Yes.
The mass redundancies across all industries. Obviously made famous this year by tech firms in the US and other places, but this happens in law and banking and various other places as well. And people are wise to that. The younger generation's now wise, going, hang on a minute, I'm a number on a sheet, aren't I? At some point, my name's going to come up.
Yeah.
So they know that. Our generation might not have realised that when we went into the workforce, but the younger generation's coming through going, okay, so you had the global financial crisis, and then we've got this. Then we had the, European Union effectively collapsed, Brexit, that affected the markets, lots of redundancies going on there. Then we've got COVID, all the issues we have here in South Africa, energy crisis. We nearly ran out of water at one point. People seem to forget that.
Yes.
There's still some provinces struggling with that as well. That there's all of these challenges. It goes back to what you were saying about, the younger lawyers coming through may have 2 or 3 careers. They're looking a bit further. I know that from the younger generation that we speak to, and we speak to with our platform Umbi, this is all about taking control. Like people are looking to take control of their own careers and not putting emphasis on the employer anymore. So you've got that pressure as well as all the other ones that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said many times before, and this probably goes back 10 years, where the notion of we interview someone to see if they can come and work for us, those days are long gone. Applicants are interviewing the employer to see if they want to work for them, and this feeds into what you were saying about the changing the lens. A lot of partners, a lot of people across industries have the view, why wouldn't you want to come and work for us? Look how great we are. Look how fabulous our clients are. Look at the benefits we offer. And then the applicant is looking there saying, well, why should I work for you? And that's what's really important for everybody to understand. What is the 2-minute elevator pitch? Yeah. An EVP sounds like a really fancy thing, and there's a lot of work that goes into determining what that EVP is. But the bottom line is an EVP is a 2-minute elevator pitch. So that when you bump into somebody around the fire, when you are having a barbecue or a braai, whatever you call it, you can very easily articulate why someone should want to work where you work.
100%, yes. And those those employers potentially who don't realise that this is a much more symbiotic relationship now, and for the last certainly 2, maybe 3 decades, it's all been about the client. It's all been about the firm, like you were saying, and we both said, why wouldn't you want to work for us? We're amazing, etc. It's now much more equal. Those that don't realise that yet, when they're looking to grow or looking to replace or looking to build or looking to keep people around, they're going to lose out, and they're going to be faced with that 2.5 million rand loss every single time, and obviously that goes up if the person's more experienced and has clients that might leave with them as well. And I think that's a really big challenge, changing that lens, changing that attitude, and realizing that times have changed, and all of those pressures. Like I said, I mean, again, I repeat myself again, but I said to another HR team the other day I think you're going through the biggest challenges HR's ever faced, which I think bodes really well for your business and your consultancy, because you've been through these challenges. You're clearly incredibly passionate about the HR field, as am I, albeit a much smaller area of HR, but it's all about people at the end of the day. I mean, you've clearly got that passion for people, making that environment right for them. And it must be interesting from a consulting perspective for you to work with different businesses in different fields. Yes, there's a lot of similarities when it comes to people, but it must be interesting for you to see different challenges in different sectors.
Without a doubt. I mean, the mining client I have, it's my first foray into mining, and it's a completely different animal. In terms of the environment, and it's a mine in off the coast of Africa. I'm not going to mention the country, and just to get to grips with their challenges, what happens on the ground, what are their requirements in terms of local representation, the requirements in terms of health and safety, which are significant. So at the core, you still need people to run your business, but how it's run is slightly different. And it's probably the difference between manufacturing, production versus a knowledge industry. In manufacturing and production, you have an operating system, you have a production line where you have people operating machines 9 times out of 10, and they Okay, we just have load shedding now. So
it's still running.
Okay, so the skills level is different. So maybe the framework for decision making is different. The complexity of their work they do is different. Maybe the problem solving is different. But they're still people at the end of the day, and they still deserve to be treated with care and compassion and respect.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, and by the way, anybody who's watched more than one podcast of mine, of the Legal Unicorns, will know that this is becoming a trend to have, towards the end of the interview, to have the load shedding.
Okay.
It's quite... it happened last time and the time before, and it's now happened. So we've got the hat trick. I can see what you mean, and that. But for someone like you to be able to, you've made the brave move, moving into taking control of your own destiny, which I love. I did that 15 years ago, and you'll get my full support if you need it ever.
Thank you.
Here come the lights back on. I'm like I said at the beginning, you've been someone who I've got to know professionally via email or telephone calls since I moved here, and you've always been incredibly kind to me and open to my approaches and conversations, and that. So I thank you for that. And if I can return the favour ever by helping you with clients or any assistance with your business, I'll be delighted to.
Thank you.
But I think, the South African market is really lucky to have people like you, people who genuinely are passionate about HR, have built a career in it, have gone out on your own now, and have got experience of different industries, who've stayed passionate about it, isn't just doing it because that's what they know. You clearly are, and you understand the challenges coming forward, whatever that may be, technology, DE&I, culture issues, change as we move from boomers into Gen Y running companies, the changes in culture. There's a word I always mention to recruiters and to HR people and partners of law firms, and that's the word relevance.
Absolutely.
I think this is a word that has never been in the psyche of a law firm ever before. They've always been relevant, and they are largely very, very relevant, but they have to keep changing with the times to stay relevant, because we've seen in this country alone and globally the rise of alternative legal service providers and technology providers who are built as replacements for the traditional law firms. And those ALSPs are not going anywhere. No. And they're growing and they're doing great work. And there's a few podcasters and journalists I follow in that space, and they're always talking about the growth of alternative suppliers, and because the clients ultimately want it in a different way. But look, this has been a fantastic chat. I'm going to have to let you go. I've got a plane to catch. You've got work to do. But thank you so much for joining me, Lynn. I really, really enjoyed it. It's, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but it's so good to sit with someone who's so clearly very passionate about our sector, people, processes, improvement of people's lives. I know you mentioned it on your written document, but you genuinely do want to help improve each individual's life. And, like I said, the South African market's lucky to have someone like you. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I appreciate it. Was really a great conversation, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, round 2 will come soon. We've got loads we can talk about. But no, thanks very much for joining me. And,
thank you, Rob.
Yes, all the best.
Thanks.
Thanks.